All right, we're live.
Not yet. Practice session.
Antoinette, I'm going to start the webinar now, and we should start to see some attendees populate.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, should we go ahead with attendance?
I just have 6 o'clock now. Maybe we want to give it another minute or two,
Okay.
unless you're really eager to go.
No, I wasn't sure. When you post on YouTube, is it okay if there's a bunch of dead silence in the beginning?
Well, people could hear us now, so we could just remind folks that we are meeting tonight. We will be starting shortly, and we're just waiting for a few more people to join us.
Gotcha. Thank you, Jeremy.
No problem. Very few things we do are precision timed.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining. We're gonna get started in another minute or two, just because folks are still trickling in. Okay, Jeremy, why don't we go ahead with attendance?
You got it. I'm going to mute everybody now. Committee members, I am going to call your name. When I do, please unmute yourself. Acknowledged I have called your name, and you should hear an acknowledgement from me. If I do not acknowledge you, I did not hear you, get my attention. So we'll start with Antoinette Martinez.
Here.
Thank you. Genesis Aquino. Nicholas Azadian.
Present.
Thank you. Joan Body.
Here.
Thank you. Gladys Bruno. Jalixa Camposano. John Fontillis. Hector Gonzalez. John Johnston. John Johnston.
I'm here. I'm here.
Marilyn Melman. Rovika Rajkishan.
Here.
Thank you. Maria Roca. John Santori.
Present.
Thank you. If you are a board member but not a committee member, your attendance is not required. I am not calling your name, but I will write your name down on the attendance sheet. Antoinette, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeremy. And thank you everyone for calling into this meeting tonight, especially community members, Jane and Bryce. Thanks for joining us today. So tonight's conversation is going to cover obligations of New York City building owners and the risk of non-compliance to local law 152. And a huge thank you to Nick Azadian, who's a community board member, who's going to be leading tonight's conversation. So I'll kick it off to you, Nick. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you, Antoinette. Jeremy, I can just share my screen.
Yes, the green button on the bottom.
Got it. All right. So
We got
not
it.
only am I a board member, but I'm also a professional engineer in the state of New York. And I deal with the building trades. So Local Law 152 is a law that was originally passed by the City Council in 2020 and has to do with inspections of gas piping for all buildings. Currently, for this year, if you are in a community board district anywhere in the city, with the district being 2, 5, 7, 13, and 18, you are required to have your gas, if you do have gas piping in your building, to be inspected by a licensed master plumber, with the exception of if the building is classified as R3, where R3 would be single family and 2-family properties in New York City. Otherwise, any other building type within those community board districts is required to be inspected, and soon, because those are supposed to be in prior to December 31st, to ensure that the gas piping is not leaking. There's a lot of technical jargon in the law, but the short of it is that if you are either an owner of one of those properties or sit on a co-op board or a condo board and are responsible for this particular element of it, you probably already have done this, but if not, then you should very quickly retain the services of a master plumber to inspect the piping. Now, in some of these older installations, if there are leaks, those leaks will be noted in their report, and those would be sent to the city, and you would then be at risk of having the gas service shut down until those repairs can be made. So if the owners of these properties are able to, I would recommend getting a gas meter. And there's a couple of gas meters that are available in some of the local plumbing stores. And I can provide a link to the community board on a couple that are equivalent to the ones that the plumbers will utilize when they're doing the test to verify if you have any leaks in the piping prior to having the plumber come out. So that might sound really ridiculous, but the reason being is that if the plumber's measuring device is linked directly to the Department of Buildings, so the plumber is obligated to notify the Department of Buildings if there is a leak, and then also the utility company. The utility companies are notoriously cautious and will shut down the service, which now that we're coming into the winter is a big problem, considering most buildings in New York are heated by natural gas these days, and could potentially really cause some problems for not only the owner but also the tenants for as long as it takes the piping to be repaired if there is an issue, or to have the service turned back on, as the utilities are very slow. So if you can, I would try to nab a meter from one of the local plumbing stores and do a very quick inspection on your own. And I can kind of show you some examples of where that is, what you would see, and typically where the exposed gas piping would be. And we'll get to that in a couple of the other pages. So let's say that you happen to have one of these buildings, but you do not have any gas in the building. You still have to do something. Per the local law, they require you to submit essentially an affidavit signed and sealed by either a registered architect or engineer that states that there is no gas piping in the premises. Failure to do so, either to submit this letter or to have the gas inspected at the appropriate time, could potentially open up the owner of the property to violations, in excess of $10,000. So the city, in their estimation, gave the building owners sufficient time to do this, and thus this is the levy should that not be done. And I'm sure there will be a number of building owners that are probably scurrying to go do this now, just because everyone's busy. So that is really the essence of the local law. This came about because of there being numerous gas explosions in the city over the last couple of years, largely due to non-inspection, but also illegal installations. And I think recently we had a fire. I don't recall the exact address on one of our rather beloved restaurants on Fifth Avenue, which then engulfed a portion of the other building and then displaced a number of tenants. And what you unfortunately see in a lot of smaller scale restaurants and things like that, people will do a lot of illegal modifications. And so the intent of this local law is to try to catch those modifications, either to cause a violation or to cause a correction, so that there isn't any more illegal gas installations in the city that could pose a risk to the wider general public. So that was really the basis of why the law was created. And now it's essentially getting rolled out on a borough by borough or community board basis across the city. I guess, Antoinette, before I go into kind of like some of the examples, I don't know if anybody has any questions specific to this and I can try to answer them. If not, we'll just keep going.
Use the raise your hand function if you have questions. Nick, I have one hand up. Would you like me to call on them or would you like to?
I think I can see them. Cynthia?
Nick, my only question is what happens if you have difficulty getting the licensed master plumber to come out to do the inspection? Because there's not like a million of them and we're in the biggest borough.
You can get them. There's a number of folks that are advertising for this. Cynthia, if you need one, I can recommend somebody to you. But generally speaking, for the wider public, there are, if you Google master plumber in Brooklyn, you'll get about 15 or 20 names pretty quickly. And you might have to make 4 or 5 phone calls, but somebody will be available.
Thank you, Nick.
Sure.
Nick, I see no additional hands.
In that case, I'm just going to go through very quickly just to show some examples of some gas installations in Brooklyn. I can't say where these places are for obvious reasons, but just to give you a general idea of kind of what they look like in case some folks haven't been down to a basement of a building to look at what this stuff actually is. So this is a picture in a basement of 2 gas meters, and the gas piping is coming into the meters. And so when the plumber would come out, most of the places where the leaks would occur would be at the fittings. And those fittings, for example, this is a cap. A fitting could be a T-fitting, could be an elbow fitting, and a lot of the fittings are present at the meters. And oftentimes you'll get pinhole leaks either at the connections of an elbow or going into a meter as one of the common places. Generally speaking, the plumber is going to test the exposed areas that have gas, which are typically going to be where the meters are, water heaters, boilers, and things of the such. And we'll go through a couple more pictures to show you a couple other examples. So this is just a picture of some gas meters. This is a picture of a pair of water heaters. And then you can see the gas piping here running pretty much up and eventually goes out. And then these are essentially the burners for the water heaters. Again, common places for gas to be leaking would be at these fittings. You can see here there was some kind of junction or an isolation valve they put in. So this is another place where it could leak, but those are common locations. The other thing the plumber will be looking for would be illegal installations. And I have one example of that at the end as well, because that will be noted down in the report that he submits to the city, and that will need to be rectified prior to him being able to submit another one by the end of the year. So if you do fail that inspection, it's imperative that you get it fixed as soon as possible, which unfortunately will probably cost an arm and a leg, but that will prevent you from satisfying the city's requirement, because that plumber will not be able to submit a clean report until the violations or the illegal fittings or whatever might be there have been cleared. As another example, this is a boiler, and you can see also more gas piping here. There was a union here, but it's just more of the same. This is a very old isolation valve, but still legal, still okay. Finally, this is another example of a pair of meters here. So there used to be an additional meter here. And so these are the types of installations that the law is trying to prevent. At some point, the meter was disabled and this was isolated off. However, typically on these, what are known as dead legs, these tend to leak more in natural gas distribution systems because no one's really paying attention to them. This is the active portion, and this is no longer active in this area. So the law is going to encourage folks to essentially demolish this back to only the active sections, only because things that are forgotten and no longer working have a tendency to leak and, you know, out of sight, out of mind until it's a problem. So that's pretty much it for the presentation. I have 3 links up here, which we'll send this around. One is a link to New York City Oasis, which is a good way of looking up a property. If you're in charge of it, you can look up your property to try to determine the classification. So for an example, New York City Oasis is this. So it's a full GIS map of New York City. So let's say that we wanted to look at this particular property. I have no idea. I just picked it at random. This will give you a lot of locational information about it. And from that, you can get a direct link to the Department of Buildings website, which is the old New York City BIS system. I have a separate link in the presentation as well. And from there, you can look up the C of O for the property, which is this button. You have to pick one. And that C of O will tell you the classification of your property. It might be an older classification from 1968. However, the 68 and current classifications are similar enough where you'll be able to determine very quickly whether you have an R3 building and are exempt, or if you're required to comply with this law. And I guess with that, that's pretty much everything I have.
There is a question in the Q&A, and there's a board member who has their hand up.
All
Yeah,
right.
I see the question. Sorry, I see the question from Jane. Jane, I'm going to promote you to a panelist, so you should be able to unmute your line to ask your question.
Hi. Nick, do you see my question?
Yeah, I'm reading it now. I'm sorry, I missed it earlier. I'm going to read it for everyone's benefit. If time allows and you have any insight, could you address basement laundry rooms for pre-C of O co-ops? Those are always fun. We passed our inspection, but I understand there might be some issues down the line at the laundry room. I know dryers are supposed to be hard piped. So that gets to be a little bit more complicated. It really depends. Sometimes the city will allow it to be grandfathered, but you would need to have them, one, piped correctly. And sometimes a lot of the pre-C of O laundry rooms, if, some of the equipment is very old and the gas piping is very old, potentially can open you up to violations under this law because some of the fittings are no longer compliant. We see this a lot in buildings that had gas installations prior to like 1990. Because that's when some of the plumbers started to, or the rules changed a little bit in terms of what they were enforcing versus what they weren't enforcing. And a lot of the changes occurred really in 2008, but you saw a lot of the worst installations prior to 1990. Jane, we can probably talk offline a little bit more about it because from my experience, a lot of these are like building specific, specifically for the laundry rooms that aren't on the C of O and usually involves an expediter and turns into a ball of wax.
Right. Okay. I'll try to find you after. Thank you.
Sure.
Jane, you can reach out to the community board and we'll be happy to make the connection with Nick.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
I guess, John, you were next, I believe.
Okay, thank you. So Nick, first, fantastic presentation. This is really helpful, and I thank you for taking the time to do this today. I did want to ask something. You mentioned it's for 3-family homes only, right?
No, so for R2, meaning single family and two family, those are currently exempt and do not have to do this.
Okay.
But if you are a 3-family or more, or any other building type therein, you are required.
Okay. Here's why I ask. I'll have to double check the map you sent, but I believe that we are a 2-family home. All the other houses on our block are 2-family homes. But for some reason in the Department of Business, it says we're a 3-family home. And we got one of those letters, and the letters in New York, my concern is that, there'd be like with the signs, if you remember on Fifth Avenue, where everyone had to take down their signs and they all got violations, you get a letter, it's kind of like a shakedown. And our thing is a 2-family home. I want it corrected. I contact Department of Buildings, I contact Housing and Preservation, and neither of them give me a satisfactory answer. So I don't know what to do, because we are 2-family, and I don't know how to address this.
It's probably a little bit more complicated, and the reason why HPD probably doesn't know or doesn't care, it's not their department.
Yeah, they said don't worry about it. Wasn't there?
Right. Yeah, it's like whatever. The Department of Buildings,
you're fine, but yeah.
Yeah, the Department of Buildings is really what it is, and some of these properties were converted at some point from 3 to 2-family, and they may have been illegally converted, and this could have been done in 1950 and no one knows. Probably later, but so that you would need to sort out. The problem is that I would suggest that it would be cheaper and easier to pay the plumber to do this now.
Okay.
Potentially, because to try to get this amended to the Department of Buildings, it's probably like a 4-month escapade at least.
Okay.
Just, we can talk offline, and, I don't mind, if you don't mind me coming by, I can go take a look and try to see if I can help you out.
Yeah, definitely. Because it's very confusing, and we see that, but hearing that, okay, that sounds like a plan. So, okay, cool.
Joan.
Hi, everybody. I had mine done because this is a condominium complex. And when the plumber sent his report to the buildings department, I did get confirmation of compliance from the buildings department. So you will get, once he finishes, and that's an extensive, very extensive inspection. The plumber tested every joint of every gas pipe. It took 2 days to complete the job. He also checked to make sure that the outdoor exhaust pipe were working properly. So it's expensive, but it does put your mind at ease once you know that everything is working properly and there are no leaks. And again, you do get confirmation from the buildings department. And if you're a condominium complex with more than one building, you will get confirmation for each building.
To Joan's point, the length and the duration of the inspection is really based on the amount of gas piping. So in a larger multifamily property, let's say a 20 unit or a 30 unit or a 40 unit or however many it may be, that can turn into a very extensive inspection.
Yes,
for a 3 or 4 family home, there's less gas piping and it's usually a much shorter inspection, but it's still, the plumbers are going to be very careful because they are also licensed entities in the city and state, and they do not want to lose their license for doing a improper inspection.
Well, this is 8 buildings and 69 units. What he did find, and you have to shake your head at some of these things. A couple of years ago, the gas company changed all of the gas meters because now they're reading them remotely. They don't have to come into the building any longer. And he 2 out of all of the 69 had a very minor leak. And he called the gas company came right away. And his detector detected the leak. The gas company's detector did not detect the leak, which you have to scratch your head really with these things. And the cause of the leak was when the gas meters were installed, they did not tighten the valve enough. That was fixed on site right away. And yes, that was reported to the buildings department. They came back with a question if any further work was needed. And the answer was no further work was needed. And all that is in the report. And that is in a safe place. So I'm very grateful that we don't have to do this every year. It's every, 4 years?
I believe it's it's 4 years.
Every 4 years. So we're due now in 2025. Expense.
Yes,
By the way.
what Joan described is a common theme. You know, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of gas installations do leak. In fact, most of them do. And, you know, the meters that the city has required everyone to use are significantly more sensitive because the utility company doesn't care because they're selling more gas, usually. Because if it's downstream of the meter, they're just making more money. So they're just looking at it from a life safety thing where, you know, you need to have a certain amount of leakage from the piping before it becomes a problem versus a very, very slow and minor leak likely isn't going to do anything and it's not worth their time. Not the way it should be, but, you know, everyone has their priorities, unfortunately, and they're usually not aligned.
It is what it is.
John.
Hi, Nick. Thanks for the presentation. I just saw that the city is going to pass a regulation requiring buildings under 7 stories to be electric for heating, for water heating, right? No new gas installation. But that's for new buildings, right? So that doesn't apply to these kinds of properties. I'm just wondering if the sort of the point of that legislation is gradually to get property owners to shift to remove their gas and electrify, or if that's, you know, just no new gas installation going forward.
So I'm going to answer your question and then I'm going to give you my opinion, and the key word is my opinion. So the current law, which is being proposed, would ban natural gas hookups for 6-story residential buildings and below. So small scale stuff primarily, starting in, I believe, 2030, if the date is correct. I mean, I'd have to go back. The intent is to try to continue moving along with the city's electrification approach. And that would not only restrict no gas for hot water heating, it would be no gas in the building, period. So you're looking at electric ranges, you're looking at electric laundry, you're looking at electric hot water heater and electric heating, which currently, you know, is challenging. I can tell you this from a design standpoint. You know, the power requirements, all of that is much more than what anybody would imagine. And usually, you know, the corresponding operational costs or the electric bills are higher than what people would be most accustomed to. In my opinion, the city is, in conjunction with this law, trying to incentivize people via the stick approach to essentially try to abandon natural gas and use electric. Whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent, that is what I think the city's intent is for this.
But that does not apply to buildings that already exist.
It does not apply to buildings that already exist. But, you know, as Joan just mentioned, compliance with local law 152 is a pain because potentially you don't know what else could be happening. You know, if there's a problem where the gas has to be turned off, the utility company doesn't run back out to turn it back on, which then means, you know, you might be without heat and hot water for a month. And if a building owner has tenants or it's a multifamily building and there's only one boiler, that can be a huge, issue to the building owners or the tenants or everybody combined. And there's really nothing that the owner can do, especially because of the way that the law is written and how the plumber could potentially lose his license if he doesn't report it or decides to falsify something. So I think they probably should have written local law 152 with a little bit more leeway in terms of how they do the reporting, but that's not the way it is. And, it potentially, can cause some significant disruptions to everyone's lives should there be a problem with the gas piping.
Just one more question. Does it make financial sense to electrify rather than try to comply with the law if there's an issue that comes up?
Usually not, just because of timing. So, for example, if a building had active tenancy, someone would have to provide heat and hot water through another means, and then you'd have to submit drawings to the Department of Buildings. Those would have to be approved. Contractor would have to be brought on to build it. The tenants would likely have to vacate along with whoever the owner is. It becomes almost impossible and very impractical. Not only to say that, but then the bills for all of this stuff would be very high, along with the capital cost of putting in the new equipment. So, while electrification may be what we all have to do eventually, it is going to be extraordinarily challenging for the city with its aging buildings to do so without bankrupting pretty much half of the people that own them.
Okay. I know that's a larger conversation, but thank you very much for that.
Sure.
Okay. Do we have any other questions?
That's no additional hands and no additional questions in Q&A.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Nick. Really appreciate.
Certainly.
So we do have some more time. I did really wanted just to have a conversation on some updates. So for the affordable housing project in Sunset Park, where the library is located and the new library, the application is live and it'll be live until January 13th. So if you know anyone who is interested, please help spread the word. And then on the newsletter that was sent out, circulated last month, and I'll be sure to send out the information again, the Fifth Avenue Committee, they're assisting folks with the application and they have a phone number. So it's here, 347-844-0220. And, this is a really great aid that they're giving to folks in the community who need any help completing and submitting the application for this housing lottery. And then I know we also had talked about some upcoming committee meetings that we have to plan for, for the upcoming new year. So listed here is our landlord fire safety conversation that we had discussed. We also talked about having a workshop on basement apartments and code enforcement, as well as an economics of the 737 4th Avenue development. For that last piece, I did reach out to the Fifth Avenue Committee and to Councilmember Carlos Menchaca's office, but no one ever responded back to me. So if we would like to have this conversation, we should just think about who to connect with, being that we weren't able to at least get to Carlos Menchaca before he leaves office. But we could definitely revisit that. So I also want to open this up to folks if there's anything that anyone wants to discuss. Also, if there's any additional direction that you'd like to see the Housing Committee take lead on. One thing before I open it up for questions, I did also want to mention that we're going to be working jointly with the Accessibility Committee with Cindy. And I know there were a number of folks who raised interest in that. So we are going to be planning a workshop, a joint workshop and meetings going forward in the new year. So I see Nick, you have a question?
More of a comment for the economics of 737. I believe I think there was some documentation floating around from the borough president's office or the mayor-elect or whatever we want to call him right now. So I know there was some of that floating around, and then, potentially you could reach out to the developer themselves, possibly. I don't know if they'd be willing to share anything, but we can ask.
That's a good idea. And do you, would you happen to have a point of reference for that documentation from Adam's office?
I think John might have actually gotten it, of all people.
Okay.
I think there was a FOIL request, so I think that's where that came from. John, yeah, okay. Yep.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Nick. John?
Yeah, Antoinette, I foiled the borough president's office because in his response, in his ULURP response, it had mentioned an economic analysis. So I submitted a FOIL request for that. I got it back. Because I don't know anything about housing, I didn't know what I was looking at. So I can send it to you, but it would be good to sort of go through that and try to understand it. I mean, regarding that piece, I would just support a general conversation about why it costs $100 million to build that building. I think we just need to sort of get some of the baseline information about how much it costs to build different kinds of structures at this time, based on different sizes, based on different attributes of the structures. I mean, if an overall community goal is to build more units of housing, I think having a breakdown and having an understanding of how much housing costs for different types of housing would be enormously helpful. And I think it was, in my opinion, it was a problem that the community didn't get any sort of analysis of why it was going to cost $100 million to put up these 135 units. By the way, there was one article that said that 737 project filed with 180 units. I don't know if anybody else saw that. I haven't been able to figure out what's going on, but there was one article online said that when they actually filed, the project had 180 some units, not 135. I'm just passing that information along. If presumably it would be in the filings. I tried to find them, but I couldn't. But I'll get back to you if I can find anything. Just very quick, Antoinette, just the other two things were, I was wondering if we could create an email list for everybody, at least an optional email list for everybody on the housing committee to join. So if they want to be on an email list, we could contact each other. That would be a request. And doing that through Google Groups is a free way to do it. And also as a way to keep people's email addresses private if they want to keep their email addresses private. So I would request the creation of an email list. And then also I would request, or I would like to suggest doing a housing survey, just walking around the neighborhood and writing down all available locations where housing could go, all of the available vacant lots, all of the properties that are obviously in distress and haven't seen investment in a long time. Trying to put together a list of properties that are either already zoned for housing or could site housing in the future. And then I think that could be a list that could then be brought to elected officials and be brought to the city. And we could have a conversation about how much it would cost to purchase those properties, which obviously once you control the land, you're changing the economic consideration. But again, I don't know what I'm talking about. This is just me talking off the top of my head, but I think starting with baseline information, again, starting with these are 10 or 15 sites in Sunset Park in CB7 that could host housing. This is their block and lot number. I mean, I think a group of even just 5 to 10 volunteers could canvass the entire neighborhood in a few hours. So I would love to be part of that. And if other people would like to be part of that, I think that's something that this committee could do and could take that to Alexa and start to, generate conversation out of that. So those are my overall suggestions.
Great, thank you so much, John. So that's definitely something that we could work towards in the coming months. And thank you so much for bringing up the conversation point of an email list. I know that there was some back and forth on this a couple of months ago. So Jeremy, would you be able just to help clarify how we could go about having some sort of conversation, electronic conversation with folks
So
on
we are
the.
not allowed to give out to community board members email addresses because it's a private email address. If you all decide amongst yourselves to share your email addresses with each other, that's outside of the community board, and I haven't shared a thing.
Okay, so we can have an informal stream of
We could have
conversation.
an informal group, something that is not part of the community board. I just want it to be known that any discussion is not the community board's position on anything.
Okay, thank you.
No
So
problem.
we could think of a way of getting that started, and whoever's interested in being a part of that, I'll just need to take a step back and try to think of logistically how to set that up. And then also making sure that any major talking points that come from those streams of conversations are also circulated with folks on the community board. And Dan, I see you have a question or a comment?
I do, thanks, Antoinette. I just want to say, first of all, John, I think you suggested the same thing for the Economic Development Committee. I don't know, in terms of the listserv, it sounds like a good idea. I think the easiest way to do it is just for committee members to just send John an email and say, yeah, put me on the listserv of the Google group. That could do it. It's sort of a person-to-person communication. Is a good way to get it started. I also want to say, John, for someone who doesn't know what he's doing, it's a pretty good suggestion for the Housing Siting Committee. We have some precedent for that in terms of school siting. And Joan, I think if you're still on this, if you're still at the meeting, you were a one-person committee at some point, and it would go around in your car finding sites that later became schools. So
That's the way I did it.
Yeah, we've done that before for schools, and it worked out very well. A lot of these sites that we gave to the School Construction Authority and the council member later became education school sites for schooling. So there's a precedent in this community board for exactly doing that. So I'm not volunteering yet, but I think it's a good start, John. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And also to add to that, I think it would be important to also look at community land trusts, and if that's something that we could bring to Sunset Park. I see a comment from Bryce. Thank you so much. Bryce, I'm going to make you a panelist.
I'm also responding.
Okay. Okay, I don't think it's working. Okay, so Bryce's comment is just to pop a note with building additional housing, taking a look at demographics in regards to how much money people make in this area should be helpful in pegging down what sorts of buildings to look at. Yeah, I definitely agree. Thank you so much for that comment. All right, let's see. Okay, Nick?
Two brief points. For also on the economic side, both myself and John Fontillis both work in the construction industry and probably can help with that. I don't know how much time John has because I know he's very busy, but we can probably help guide that conversation a bit if needed or requested.
For the 737?
Either 737 or in general, why things cost so much.
Okay.
And then in terms of like how like land trust and things like that, we can talk about that as well.
Okay. Very helpful to have so many experts on the board. Thank you, Nick. Okay, let's see. Did anyone else have anything other than these topics that they wanted to bring up for discussion? Okay, John?
Yeah, Matt, this is kind of seeing the discussion that's been going on here and looking a little bit. I'm still a pretty new member, but I wanted to check since there was talk about new buildings and things like that. I know new buildings are required to have trees, but they can be done off-site. Is there any way to find where they're putting them, like whether they're in our community board or whether they're putting them somewhere else in the city? If they put off-site ones.
John, do you have a specific property that you're discussing?
Yeah, 6002 3rd Avenue is the one.
Okay, so I can look that up. If you can send me an email reminder, I would appreciate it, but I could certainly look into that.
Yeah, sure, because I know that they're doing it and it'd be nice if they were nearby, but yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
And Jeremy, do you know if there's information on that that's publicly available? That's being tracked across Brooklyn or the city?
I don't know specifically, but I can find out.
Okay. Yeah, that might be helpful for folks in case others are interested in having that information handy. John Johnston?
So I have a little bit of background on that. We had the Loveridge Storage Center built next to us, and they cut down 5 beautiful 10 to 15-year-old trees just to build a storage center. So I called the commissioner of the Parks Department because I didn't understand it. So my understanding is they can actually either plant a new tree somewhere or give the city of New York a certain amount of money that they determine how much the tree is worth, and then the city can determine how much money they can plant with those trees. Because I called Commissioner Silver's office on that, and I had not a very nice conversation with them because I said, how can you let them cut down beautiful 10-year-old trees just to build a storage center? And they said, we couldn't do anything. We had to say yes once they come up with a plan. And I said, I would understand for housing, but for this? But anyway, we had 8 trees on the block. Now we have 1 and we have 2 holes. And they never replanted the trees at all. And the other trees the city just took the money and I don't know what they did with it from the developer. But just my 2 cents on that.
And how long ago was this?
Oh, I would say 2 to 3 years ago, at least. And the trees, they were beautiful trees. They were there for literally 10 years. They were as tall as some buildings and they cut them down just to build the storage center. And the Parks Department sadly gave the okay for it.
It's horrible. Okay, thanks for sharing that, John.
And they're gonna start doing it again for the new buildings across the street because I heard they're gonna cut down some of the trees around the new apartment buildings they're gonna build as well. Because they have no choice. There's no way to bring the bulldozers in without cutting down the trees. So we're gonna lose more trees in that area.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. I had no idea. Jeremy, if you could circle back and see if there is any information that you could help provide, I think that'll be really
I'll
helpful.
find out what the city's policy is on that.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to bring up? Okay, so I'll work on these notes, and then I'll be reaching out to folks to see if they're interested in joining, being on an unofficial email list for housing committee issues. And if you're not comfortable with being on the list, we'll make sure that information that's being discussed through those channels, a brief summary is also distributed to the community board so that there's transparency about what's being discussed. And that's all I have for tonight. If anyone else doesn't have anything to bring up, I think we could end a little early. Thank you so much, Nick, for taking lead on today's conversation. It was very helpful. I hope everyone has a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow on the larger board meeting call.
Thank you, Antoinette. Have a good night.
Thank you.